The lost tech that proves history is a lie. Spin the dial, bronze gears mesh. The Antikythera mechanism doesn't just track the moon, it predicts eclipses and schedules the Olympics. If this existed, our timeline's off by centuries. Tonight, 50 artifacts force a rewrite: navigation, medicine, metallurgy, power. Watch for patterns that repeat across continents with no known contact. We'll tease the surgical skulls that healed, stones that look heat-softened, and a cluster of jars that behave like batteries. Start with ancient computing, then jump to ancient power. You'll see the latter appear where textbooks leave gaps. Start with machines that shouldn't exist, then scale up to entire infrastructures. Stay with this, each section will unlock a clue the next one makes unavoidable. Framework: how we judge too advanced. Before we call anything impossible, we need rules. 4 tests decide if tech is too advanced for its supposed era: precision tolerance, required theory, supply chains, and replication difficulty. Precision tolerance asks, how tight are the fits? When you see granite boxes with internal corners so sharp a machinist's square catches light, or gear teeth cut to ratios matching lunar cycles, you're not looking at guesswork. Tight tolerances mean controlled tools, consistent methods, and measurement culture. If the surface finishes suggest abrasives beyond sandstone or repetitive geometry implies gauges and templates, that's our first flag. Required theory is about the math behind the build. You don't stumble into differential gearing that tracks the variable speed of the moon unless you understand cycles, ratios, and error propagation. You don't design inverted siphons and multi-arch aqueducts without pressure math. If the artifact encodes a model, astronomical, hydraulic, optical, that demands abstraction the era supposedly lacks, we mark it. Supply chains are the hidden skeleton. A single perfect alloy ingot implies prospecting, smelting, controlled atmospheres, and standardization. Roman concrete that self-heals in seawater means systematic sourcing of pozzolans, lime production, mixing protocols, and a labor force trained to repeat it at scale. If the object hints at networks, mines, quarries, kiln sites, workshops, apprenticeship pipelines that aren't documented, the object outruns its context. Replication difficulty is our sanity check. Can modern tools reproduce it easily? If yes, maybe it's clever craftsmanship. If no, if we struggle to match a Wootz blade's microstructure without precise thermal cycling, or we can't move a 1,000-ton block without enormous modern rigs, that gap matters. It doesn't prove mystery tech, it proves lost process knowledge. Now baseline the ladder. Every era knows some things: Stone Age, lithics, fibers, fire control; Bronze Age, casting, simple alloys, early measurement; Iron Age, harder tools, improved logistics, more complex machines. If an artifact implies knowledge leaps ahead, say chrome-treated bronze weapons resisting corrosion 2 millennia early, our ladder's missing rungs. We also track clusters. Anomalies stack near trade hubs, deserts, and quarries. Trade hubs move ideas with materials. Deserts preserve organics, wood, and plaster that rot elsewhere. Quarries archive tool marks and logistics. When you see precision masonry plus advanced water management in the same region, you're likely staring at an entire tech stack, not a one-off. Let's clear the noise. Hoaxes get filtered by context. If a device shows up with no matching debris layer, no slag, broken parts, or workshop waste, be cautious. Misdated finds happen. We cross-check stratigraphy, radiocarbon on associated organics, and inscriptions. Ritual explanations can be right, but they're not a get-out-of-thinking card. Dual use is normal. A ceremonial vessel can be an electrical experiment and a status object. We eliminate what collapses under replication or context mismatch, and keep what holds across methods. Context is king. A mechanism matters more if it appears with the infrastructure that could maintain it. A map with accurate coasts means little unless ship design, navigational training, and port records align. A surgical technique isn't a fluke if we find standardized instruments, antiseptic hints and resins, and healed bone across many patients. When artifacts appear with their ecosystems, we aren't cherry-picking, we're reading a system. Here's the logic thread we'll use throughout. An advanced artifact appears, therefore missing steps must exist. But therefore cadence keeps us honest. This seems out of place, but the tolerances in theory are undeniable, therefore a workshop tradition and textbooks, literal or oral, are missing from the record. This reservoir design seems too clever, but the silt traps and maintenance channels repeat across valleys, therefore engineers taught engineers. Keep that cadence in mind. It's the mental checklist that will keep snapping into place as we go. Our pattern watch stays live. We'll look for precision implying metalworking mastery and math literacy. We'll flag low-voltage experiments clustering around artisans and priests. We'll note nanoscale effects in glass and steel created without modern language but with consistent recipes. And we'll keep asking the 30-second question: would you keep watching if the pattern didn't build? If not, we escalate: new links, broken rules, or a reveal that reframes previous clips. With rules set, let's hit the machines, then the power that fed them. Machines that shouldn't exist: calculation, bearings, and precision. Start with the machine that thinks. The Antikythera mechanism isn't a pretty gear salad, it's a mechanical ephemeris. Bronze plates, hand-cut teeth, differential gearing that resolves the moon's anomaly, and a Saros dial predicting eclipses. One side tracks calendars and the Panhellenic games, the other models celestial cycles with compound ratios that scream, "We did the math." Notice the pin-end slot mechanism introducing lunar speed variation. That's not luck. That's kinematics applied to astronomy. What's crazy is the inscriptions read like a user manual. If there's a user manual, there were users. Therefore, workshops, prototypes, and a curriculum we haven't found. Speaking of optics, the Nimrud lens, rock crystal shaped to a convex profile, doesn't have to be a telescope to matter. Even a modest magnifier changes everything. Finer toolwork, inspection of inscriptions, early fire starting with focused sunlight, and perhaps experiments with focal length. Pair that with rock crystal lenses found in the Mediterranean and Mesoamerica, and a pattern forms. Artisans chasing clarity and curvature long before formal optics. Notice how polishing grooves reveal standardized motions. Repeatable arcs suggest jigs, or at least a method taught master to apprentice. Roman dodecahedra feel like a riddle box, but the facts are solid. Precision casting in bronze, variable apertures, consistent pentagonal faces, and knurled knobs for handling. You can argue knitting gauges or range finders. Either way, the repeatability across sites shows dimension control. The whole pairs present stable baselines at multiple distances. That implies someone tested and tuned these dimensions. A toy doesn't spread empire-wide with near-identical tolerances, unless it solves a real problem for craftsmen, soldiers, or surveyors. Now the quiet revolution, gearing beyond Greece. Fragmentary gears from Roman and Parthian contexts hint at a broader mechanical culture than our textbooks admit. In China, escapements arrive with water clocks and south-pointing chariots, delivering feedback control, energy metered, motion counted. Once you invent the escapement, you've encoded the idea that time is quantifiable and can be stabilized against drift. That's a cognitive shift. Machines can regulate nature and report on it. It's the seed of instrumentation. Bearings are the difference between brute force and elegance. On Caligula's Nemi ships, archaeologists found wooden races and bronze spheres consistent with ball bearings, reducing friction for massive rudders or turntables. Low-friction rotation isn't a luxury on a floating palace, it's a requirement. To make a bearing, you need roundness tolerance, consistent diameters, and hard-wearing surfaces, evidence of calibration culture. Remember this detail: whenever rotation becomes smooth, complexity follows. Gearing, mills, cranes, everything gets easier when friction drops. Hydraulics show up not just in aqueducts, but in ports like Lothal. The dockyard sluices allowed controlled flooding and draining with tidal cycles, managing sediment and ship draft. That's engineered flow management. You need thresholds, weirs, gate seals, and a sense for head pressure. The plan view looks like a flowchart. Intake here, settling there, maintenance gate for clearing silt. If you can model a harbor as a system, you can model a machine. Notice how all of these require measurement. You can't cut a pinion to mesh cleanly if your pitch is wandering. You can't cast a dodecahedron's faces true without patterns. You don't get lenses without testing curvature against a standard. Precision implies metalworking mastery, controlled temperatures, annealing cycles, quenching, and math literacy. Ratios live in the metal long before they live in the manuscript. What's the missing ladder? Start with materials. Bronze sheet of uniform thickness, consistent phosphorus or tin levels for stiffness, arsenical signatures that stabilize casts. Then tools, saws with abrasive slurries, bow drills with interchangeable bits, files graded by cut, scrapers for surface finish. Then gauges, calipers, straightedges, squares, scribing compasses. And finally, the mental toolkit, cyclic arithmetic, error budgeting, and the willingness to scrap parts that deviate. That's a full stack, and it leaves trash, offcuts, miscasts, broken teeth. The fact we've found some, but not the textbooks, hints at perishable media, papyrus, wax tablets, oral training. Let's connect optics to gears. Once magnification enters a workshop, inspection improves. Gear teeth get more consistent, inscriptions get finer, alignment marks more exact. In turn, better gearing drives better timekeeping, which feeds astronomy with cleaner data, closing the loop that Antikythera embodies. Observe, model, build, measure, refine. That's an engineering cycle we pretend didn't exist until the Renaissance, yet here it is, alive in bronze. Now a quick detour to feedback. Chinese escapements and differential mechanisms point to a principle. When mechanisms correct themselves, humans trust them more. A water clock that compensates for head pressure drift by using a regulator bowl is already doing control theory without equations. The south-pointing Chariot's differential, distributing rotation between wheels to maintain orientation, is an analog computation riding on gears. Once you accept that motion can carry information, you're in proto-computer territory. Friction solution scale. The Nemi bearings echo in millstones with lubricated pivots, in turntables for heavy statuary, and crane pulleys with bronze bushings. Reduced friction means less wear, which means longer maintenance cycles. That demands lubricants, animal fats, plant oils, pitch blends, and storage protocols to keep them pure. Again, supply chains, apothecaries for oils, foundries for bronze, carpenters for housing, scribes to track parts. Hydraulic control at Lothal links to sluice gates in Roman and Persian works, but here it's maritime. Saltwater eats everything. So you find evidence of bitumen coatings, wood species chosen for tannins, and joinery that swells to seal when wet. That's materials science wrapped in carpentry. It also foreshadows later inverted siphons. Once you treat water as a force you can trap, meter, and release, you stop fearing terrain and start designing through it. Let's address the skeptic voice. Could all this be isolated brilliance? Some sure. But isolated brilliance doesn't replicate across regions with consistent tolerances. When you see similar dodecahedra across the empire, when lenses crop up in multiple contexts, when gearing proliferates from timekeeping to navigation analogs, you're not seeing one genius, you're seeing guild knowledge. Crafts travel with people and people follow contracts. Trade hubs carry techniques as cargo. Here's the pattern solidifying. These machines sit at the intersection of accurate measurement and clever motion. The math isn't decorative, it's embodied in tooth counts, hole diameters, and sluice depths. The metal isn't symbolic, it's alloyed for properties that match the job. The wood is chosen for grain, the stones for abrasion behavior. Each artifact is a page from a missing manual, and together they read like a course in applied mechanics. Okay, this next shift matters. If they could build moving mines, gear trains that predict the sky, bearings that float heavy loads, sluices that tame tides, what powered the experiments that trained those hands? Static, galvanic, magnetic, the subtle forces you feel before you can name them. Power's nothing without control, but control means nothing without power. If low-voltage tricks lived in workshops and temples, they'd leave faint fingerprints the way these machines did. Thin coatings, strange jars, magnetized stones. If they could build moving mines, what powered them? Hold that question. By the end of this section, you'll see how faint signals become working tools. Let's talk electricity and fields. Power before power, batteries, static, and possible galvanic tech. Start with a jar that behaves like a circuit. In Parthian layers near modern Baghdad, archaeologists pulled terracotta vessels with bitumen stoppers, a rolled copper cylinder, and an iron rod down the middle. Fill the gap with an acidic electrolyte, wine, vinegar, lemon juice, and you get a few tenths of a volt. Not much, but stack 10 and you feel the bite. The pattern to watch. These show up near artisan quarters where metalsmiths worked dyes, gilding, and delicate finishes. Low voltage is useless for lighting a city, but perfect for chemistry. What would they do with it? Think surface transformation. Electroplating needs steady current and a conductive bath. We've got thin gold and silver layers on base metals from Greco-Roman pieces that look smoother than leaf and harder than mercury gilding alone. Some are clearly mechanical gilding, sure. But when the thickness is uniform inside recesses that a brush wouldn't reach, you start asking if a battery stack in a bath were hiding behind a workshop wall. Even limited, pulsed current changes adhesion and grain structure. Skeptics point out there's no wire spools, no power benches, fair, but wires don't preserve well and organic insulators rot. The chemistry remains. Bitumen stoppers seal against evaporation. The copper is rolled into a neat cylinder, not a random scrap. And that iron rod, it's the perfect sacrificial electrode. If this were only ritual, why the specific geometry that mirrors a galvanic cell? Remember our rule, context elevates a claim. When a jar with the right parts sits next to a metallurgical workspace, that's context. Now the Dendera light. On the wall at the Temple of Hathor, a relief shows a lotus stalk, a bulb-like oval with a snake inside, and a cable-shaped line running to what looks like a box. Is it a lamp? The Egyptology answer says no. Symbolic iconography, the Jed pillar, the Harsamtis serpent in a womb, the cycle of creation. But notice the geometry that keeps getting people's attention. A long, sealed envelope shape, an apparent conductor, a pedestal that reads like a stand. The useful move here isn't to insist it's a halogen bulb 2 millennia early. It's to ask why craft cultures keep wrapping actual technique in mythic forms. If scribes and priests were the R&D department, iconography would be their whiteboard. Symbols can be simultaneously sacred and technical memory aids. Capacitive storage is the other quiet possibility. Leyden jars show up in the 18th century, glass bottles with foil inside and outside, a rod down the middle, a varnish seal. But varnished ceramics existed in Antiquity, along with resin lacquer blends that charge with friction. If you coat a vessel inside and out with conductive slurry, separate them with a dielectric layer, and insert a conductive rod, you've built a capacitor without naming it. Static from rubbed amber or wool could be tamed, stored, and discharged in demonstrations. You'd remember that trick, and you'd keep it behind temple curtains. Amber and tourmaline prove the ancients noticed these forces. Rubbed amber attracts chaff, tourmaline under pressure develops a charge. Greek texts talk about electron, literally amber, and its strange pull. That's triboelectricity 101. Ritual objects that hum, crackle, or spark on dry days become divine on cue. Priests aren't just showmen, they're experimenters with access to rare materials, dry enclosed spaces, and uninterrupted time to iterate. Notice how many of these materials, amber, resins, varnishes, live in the same supply chains as incense and lacquerware. Magnetite lodestones close the loop with magnetism. The earliest written compasses in China are Han and later, but magnetized spoons and floating needles likely predate the manuals. A lodestone aligns itself with Earth's field, put it on a friction-reduced surface and you've built a direction finder. Combine that with sun shadows and star paths and you have redundancy for navigation. In the Mediterranean, mariners talked about fish that point north long before precise descriptions of compasses spread. That suggests the trick existed in pockets, transmitted via guilds and guarded as commercial advantage. What's crazy is how all of this clusters around artisans and priests, the same people who control pigments, oils, alloys, and calendars. Low-voltage experiments don't require power plants, they require controlled spaces, careful hands, and patience. That's temple labs, that's goldsmith benches, that's workshops where a master can say, "Don't touch that jar, it bites," and an apprentice learns by sting and story. Let's hit use cases with replication in mind. Electroplating. Even if full plating didn't happen, electrocleaning of tarnished surfaces is trivial with a weak cell. You can reduce oxides and improve adhesion before applying leaf, producing smoother finishes that age differently. Medicine. Galvanic shocks can stimulate muscle dull pain briefly or serve as diagnostic theater. Ancient texts mention torpedo fish used as numbing agents for surgery and gout. That's bioelectric anesthesia. If you can harness a fish, a jar's a logical experiment. Inks and etches are another lane. Acid and electricity together etch metals faster and cleaner than acid alone. An artisan discovering that certain baths eat designs with less effort would keep the recipe. The language wouldn't be Faraday's, it would be kitchen talk. Sharp water, living copper, tired iron. That lines up with recipes in alchemical texts that describe behavior before theory, outcomes first, models later. Now the limits, no evidence of grid-scale power. No filaments, no rotary generators. We aren't rewriting history to say there was a hidden Edison. But the presence of galvanic cells, triboelectric tricks, and magnetism literacy means the cognitive door to electricity was already cracked open. When later scientists systematized, they had a pile of folk experiments to harvest. That's how knowledge actually moves, from benches and altars to books. Tie this back to materials. Capacitors want clean dielectrics. Ancient ceramics could deliver tight, low-porosity bodies with ash glazes. Electrochemistry wants consistent electrodes. Copper and iron were abundant in workshops. Insulation wants resins. Bitumen and pine pitch do the job. Polarity wants marks, tally scratches, or die dots on stoppers guide assembly. If you imagine a temple inventory ledger, a row might read, 5 jars, 2 bite, keep dry. Remember the pattern. Low-voltage experiments cluster where supply chains for chemistry already exist. Dye houses have acids and salts, tanners have caustics, metalworkers have electrolytes by accident, priests have time, secrecy, and a steady audience. That ecosystem explains why the battery cluster shows up as rumor and residue rather than as a single grand machine. What about the showmanship angle? Demonstrations drive belief and funding. A priest who can make straw leap from a distance or a ring tingle on command gets patrons. An artisan who can fix a client's tarnished silver overnight with a hidden bath gets repeat business. These incentives create micro-innovations that spread via apprenticeships, not papyrus treatises. When collapse hits, those lines snap. The tricks become myth until someone rediscovers the recipe. Skeptic interlude. Could the Baghdad jars be merely storage for scrolls or sacred oils? Possibly, some where context varies. But when you find copper cylinders insulated from iron cores, sealed with bitumen and stained with acids, the simplest functional explanation is galvanic. When plating seems too uniform for hand burnishing, consider current. When reliefs look like devices, read them as symbols first, then ask why the symbol retains device geometry so stubbornly. Here's the payoff. Power's nothing without control, and control is meaningless without repeatable materials. In these workshops and temples, we see both. Jars that can store a trickle, stones that point to the unseen, resins that hold charge, and artisans who know how to coax behavior from matter. This isn't a lost electrical age, it's the prologue. And once you accept that, the next section hits harder. They didn't just make power, they made impossible materials that still outperform us in the wild.
What was lost? Western vulnerabilities and the quiet costs. The ledger wasn't one-sided. While Moscow's system strained, the West paid in silence. Operations compromised, programs rushed, and lives bent around secrets they didn't know were already gone. Start with what hurts most in war. Trust in your own kit and your own channels. For years, Western commanders made calls on networks the KGB could sometimes read, plan around radars the KGB had studied, and deploy tactics the KGB had rehearsed against with stolen manuals. No briefing slide captured the anxiety of that reality. Flight crews just called it gut check. Naval communications took the deepest cuts. When the Walker Ring fed keying material into KGB hands, portions of US fleet traffic leaked for years. That meant Soviet analysts learned rhythms, check-ins, patrol cycles, exercise patterns.